The world ended in a flash of white. John Hale didn't remember the fall, only the thunder that tore the sky apart, and then the silence that followed. When his eyes opened, there was only snow, burning against his skin like acid. The wreckage of Flight 227 lay scattered across the frozen pines of Alaska, each torn piece of metal steaming in the frigid air. The storm had swallowed the horizon. There was no sky, no sun, just an endless, suffocating whiteness. He tried to move. Pain screamed through his ribs. His breath came out as a sharp hiss, turning instantly into frost. He pushed himself up, coughing, the taste of blood heavy on his tongue. Around him, nothing but ruin. Seats torn from the cabin, luggage buried in drifts, the scent of aviation fuel thick and poisonous. "Hello." His voice cracked against the silence. "Is anyone?" The wind answered, low and cold. He stumbled toward the remains of the fuselage. The tail section was gone, swallowed by the forest. The wings had shattered against the trees. Inside, half buried under snow, lay the passengers, still strapped to their seats, eyes open, glassy. He turned away, fighting the rising nausea. A small sound broke through the wind, a bell, soft, delicate, out of place. John followed it, his boots crunching in the ice. Behind a mound of twisted metal, he found a small stuffed bear, its fur singed and one button eye missing. Around its neck hung a silver bell, trembling in the breeze. He picked it up, uncertain why his hands were shaking. He didn't remember any child on board. The bell chimed again, faint, almost like a whisper. He froze. Somewhere behind him, through the veil of snow, came a voice. A woman's voice, faint, calling his name. John. He spun around. Nothing. Just the white blur of the storm and the tall, motionless silhouettes of trees. His heart hammered. He dropped the toy, only to hear the bell again. This time right behind him. He turned, and saw footprints, bare, human footprints, leading away from the crash. They were fresh, too clean to have been made before the snow began to fall. His breath came faster. The prints led into the trees, into the deeper dark. He hesitated. His rational mind screamed to stay by the wreckage, to find supplies, to build a fire. But something pulled at him, something instinctive, irrational, a strange feeling that whoever left those prints wanted him to follow. He took a step toward the forest. The bell rang again, and somewhere in the white distance, the voice called once more, clearer this time, but colder. "Come back, John." A gust of wind erased the prints as he watched, and with it came the smell of smoke, but not from the wreckage. From deeper inside the forest, he felt it then, the first seed of dread. He wasn't alone out here. When morning came, it wasn't light that woke John. It was the sound of cracking ice. The night had been endless, a tunnel of cold where even sleep froze inside his skull. He had huddled beside a half-buried piece of fuselage, feeding the tiny fire he'd managed to spark with torn seat fabric and the pages of an in-flight magazine. Now, that fire was nothing but a black circle in the snow. The wreckage lay silent under a gray sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness that pressed against his ears. Every sound, every creak of the trees, every whisper of the wind, felt magnified, alive. John forced himself up, wrapping his torn jacket tighter. His breath smoked in the air. He knew he had to find food, shelter, something to keep him alive. But when he turned to look for the trail from last night, the footprints, they were gone, vanished under a smooth sheet of ice. Only the faint impression of the toy bear remained, half buried near the spot where he had dropped it. He knelt beside it. The silver bell no longer chimed, yet the metal was warm. A shiver crawled down his spine. He looked up and froze. Across the clearing, just beyond the shattered nose of the plane, the snow was disturbed. A pattern of impressions, like someone, or something, had been circling the wreck while he slept. Not boots, not animal tracks, bare feet. Dozens of them. He backed away slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, crunch, he spun around. Behind the fuselage, a shadow slipped between the trees. Too tall, too thin to be human. It moved in jerks, as if it didn't quite understand how to walk. "Hey!" John shouted, though his voice cracked halfway. "Who's there?" The forest swallowed his words. He picked up a broken piece of metal, a jagged shard of the plane's hull, and gripped it like a weapon. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. The only sound now was the slow, rhythmic beating of his heart. He needed to move. He scavenged what he could: a half-empty bottle of water, a torn survival kit, one flare. Then he started walking, heading toward the darker wall of trees. Each step sank into the snow, the weight of his breath echoing in his ears. The forest closed around him like a living thing. The air grew colder, denser, until even his exhalations seemed to hang frozen midair. Frost glimmered on every branch like crystal teeth. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't exist anymore. His hands were numb, his lips cracked, and the cold had begun to whisper. He thought he heard his name again. "John." He stopped, listening. The sound came not from ahead, but from below, as if the ground itself had spoken. The wind died, the forest went silent. Then came another sound, a low, wet breathing. Not his. He turned slowly, eyes darting between the trees. His pulse roared in his ears, and then he saw it. Something dark crouched between the roots of an old pine. The shape was still, featureless, but its breath steamed in the cold air, slow and deliberate. "Who are you?" John whispered. The figure tilted its head. For a heartbeat, he saw a face, his own, pale and hollow, staring back at him through the dark. He stumbled backward. The shape dissolved into mist. When he blinked, the forest was empty. He stood there for a long time, shaking, until his knees gave way. The fear came not from what he had seen, but from the realization that it might not have been the first time. Somewhere deep in his mind, he felt the déjà vu, like this had already happened before. The cold crept in again, curling around him like invisible fingers. He pressed on, forcing his legs to move, his mind to stay tethered to something real. But the snow began to whisper again. Faint, soft voices overlapping. Not words, not quite, just the sound of something breathing with him, through him. When night fell, he found a hollow between two fallen trees and crawled inside. His body trembled uncontrollably, exhaustion gnawing at his mind. Before his eyes closed, he saw movement at the edge of the clearing. A small figure, standing motionless in the snow. A child, holding a stuffed bear with one missing eye. The silver bell rang once, then silence. The third day began with a sound that didn't belong to the forest, a faint crackle, rhythmic, artificial. John woke to it, half buried under snow. His body ached as if he'd been beaten. The fire he'd made from twigs and seat fabric had died hours ago, leaving behind nothing but a thin scar of black ash. His breath came in short, steaming bursts as he forced himself upright. The sound came again, a hiss, a click, and then a voice, a radio. He pushed through the snow, following the noise. Near a splintered tree, something metallic glinted in the gray light. It was the wreck's cockpit, or what was left of it. The nose of the plane had broken clean off and lodged itself deep between the pines. Inside, the shattered control panels blinked faintly, small red lights flickering like dying eyes. The radio was still connected to the dashboard, cracked, half frozen, but alive. He climbed into the wreckage, careful not to cut himself on the twisted metal. The smell of burned plastic mixed with jet fuel was almost unbearable. He reached for the transceiver, brushing off a layer of frost. The speaker emitted a low, constant static hum. He turned the dial. The static shifted, deepened. Then, SOS. Anyone. Copy. His pulse surged. He grabbed the mic. This is Flight 227 survivor John Hale. I repeat, John Hale. Crash site in northern Alaska. Approximate coordinates unknown. Can anyone hear me? The speaker hissed, then fell silent. John exhaled slowly, pressing his forehead against the frozen panel. Maybe the radio was damaged. Maybe no one was left to hear him. But then the static answered. John. Hale. His breath caught. Yes. This is Hale. Who is this? Please, respond. The voice came clearer now. Calm, familiar. John Hale. Male, age 38. Born in Seattle, Washington. Emergency contact. Mary Hale. He froze. How do you know that? The silence stretched. Then the voice spoke again, quieter, almost intimate. Because I am you. John's blood turned to ice. He stepped back from the console, staring at the speaker. His reflection wavered faintly on the cracked screen beside it, distorted by the flickering light. Who is this? He whispered again. No answer. Only the faint, slow crackle of the radio. Then the voice returned, this time with static breaking every few words. You shouldn't have survived. John. Not again. He slammed the power knob, killing the sound. The cabin fell silent except for his ragged breathing. He looked around. The instruments, all dead. The gauges frozen at 0. But one of them, the altitude meter, had a smear of blood across it, drawn into a pattern. Not random. Numbers. 5 for .083 minus 163.447. Coordinates. His hands trembled as he jotted them down on the side of a broken clipboard. He didn't know why, but something in him remembered those numbers. He turned the radio back on. Static again. No voice, no whisper, nothing but that endless ocean of white noise. He grabbed the emergency map from a storage compartment and unfolded it on the snow-covered console. The coordinates pointed far north, deep into the forest, near the edge of a frozen lake. He stared at the spot for a long time. The rational part of his mind said to stay, to wait for rescue. But the voice, his own voice, had told him where to go. And deep down, he already knew he would go. He gathered what little he had, a flare, half a bottle of water, a shard of glass as a makeshift knife. Before leaving the cockpit, he looked back once more. The radio's light blinked once, and through the static, he could swear he heard breathing. Outside, the world was a graveyard of frost and silence. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint toll of the silver bell. John looked toward the tree line, the coordinates echoing in his mind like a curse. He began walking. Somewhere behind him, buried under the snow, the radio clicked on by itself. Copy. John Hale. Coordinates received. Proceeding to location. But the voice didn't come from the speaker this time. It came from the trees. The forest had changed. John could feel it with every step. The trees were closer now, their trunks warped and blackened by frost, their branches heavy with ice that cracked like bones above his head. The sky had disappeared completely, just a thick lid of gray pressing down on him. Every sound was swallowed by snow, every breath drawn too loud in his own ears. He followed the coordinates, moving north, guided by a cheap compass and instinct. The air felt alive. It breathed around him, slow, heavy, deliberate. By midday, the wind carried something new, a smell, smoke. He froze. The scent was faint, but real, not the oily tang of burning metal from the wreck, but wood, pine and resin, a fire. Someone else was alive. He pressed forward, stumbling through knee-deep snow until the trees opened into a small clearing. There, half buried in drifts, stood a cabin. It leaned crookedly, built of gray logs long ago. The roof collapsed in one corner, smoke whispering from a rusted chimney. Faded snowshoes and a broken axe hung by the door. A set of footprints led inside. Bare footprints. He hesitated. Then, gripping his glass shard tighter, he pushed the door open. The hinges screamed. Inside, dim light flickered from a dying fire in the stone hearth. Shadows moved on the walls, stretching and twisting as if they had a life of their own. The air reeked of smoke and something else. Iron? Blood? Hello, he called. No answer. The cabin was small. A cot, a table, shelves covered in dust and frozen cans of food. On the wall above the cot hung an old photograph, a man standing beside a plane on a snowy airstrip. The man's face was shadowed, but the name stenciled on the side of the plane made John's stomach twist. Hale Aviation Co. He stepped closer. His hand trembled as he brushed frost from the frame. The man in the photo looked familiar, the stance, the shape of the jaw, until he realized why. It was him. Same face, same scar above the eyebrow. But the picture looked old, decades old. The photo had yellowed, edges curled with time. He stumbled back, knocking over a lantern. Its light swung wildly across the wall, And that's when he saw it. Someone had written on the wooden boards, in thick, dark strokes, dozens of overlapping words, smeared by frozen streaks of red. They formed one sentence, repeated again and again until the wall itself seemed to bleed. He dies here. Beneath it, smaller letters carved into the wood, a name. John Hale. He dropped the shard, his breath catching in his throat. He turned toward the door, but it had swung shut behind him. The room was suddenly colder. The fire dimmed until the only light came from the cracks in the walls. A whisper echoed through the cabin. Not outside, inside. Right behind him. John. He turned slowly. Something moved in the far corner. A shadow, darker than the room itself. It shifted like liquid, then rose, taking shape. A human-shaped dot. It stepped forward, its face hidden by darkness. "Why did you come back?" it asked, and the voice was his own. John stumbled back, his heart slamming against his ribs. This isn't real," he muttered. "I'm dreaming." The shadow tilted its head. "You always say that." Then it lunged. He grabbed the broken lantern and swung. Glass shattered. Fire spilled across the floor. The shadow burst apart, the room filling with black smoke and orange flame. He kicked open the door and stumbled into the snow, gasping, coughing, watching the cabin burn behind him. The flames licked upward, but the structure didn't collapse. It melted, slowly, like ice. And just before it was gone, he saw something inside, the photograph of himself, curling in the fire, revealing another image beneath it, a black box recorder, labeled Flight 227. Then everything was gone. The fire, the cabin, the smell, replaced by cold and silence once more. He stood in the clearing, shaking. Only the footprints remained, his own, leading in circles. Above him, the gray sky groaned like a living thing. The forest exhaled, and on the wind, faint and almost kind, came that familiar whisper again. Not again, John. By the fifth day, John no longer trusted the daylight. The forest seemed to bend around him, shifting each time he blinked. Landmarks he thought he'd passed hours ago appeared again in new places. A half-buried tree stump, a frozen stream, a jagged rock that looked like a face. They followed him like echoes. He was running out of food, out of warmth, out of reason. His mind buzzed from dehydration and fear. The only thing keeping him alive was movement, the instinct to keep walking before the forest decided to swallow him whole. The snow had begun to fall again. Thick, heavy flakes that fell soundlessly, covering the ground in white deception. John stumbled through it, clutching his makeshift knife. Each gust of wind carried whispers. Some sounded like words, others like laughter. By late afternoon, he found another clearing. Circular, unnaturally perfect. The trees around it leaned inward, their trunks marked with deep gouges, like claws. The air here felt different, heavy, tasting of copper and ash. Something was watching him. He felt it before he saw it, a pressure at the base of his skull, a weight between his shoulder blades. Slowly, he turned. There, just beyond the ring of trees, two eyes glowed in the dark. Amber, unblinking. John froze. At first, he thought it was a reflection, a trick of the light. But then it moved. A massive shape emerged from the shadows, a Volf, larger than any Volf he'd ever seen, its fur black as the void, its breath steaming in heavy bursts. It stood motionless, watching him, with something too intelligent to be animal. John raised his shard. "Get away," he muttered, voice trembling. "Go." The Volf didn't move. Instead, it began to circle him, slow and deliberate, never breaking eye contact. Snow crunched softly under its paws, each step perfectly measured. "Go," he shouted again, and through the shard it missed, spinning into the snow. The Volf stopped. Then, it smiled. John's chest tightened. The expression was human, unnatural, stretching across the beast's muzzle like something wearing a mask. He stumbled backward, tripping over a buried branch. The Volf stepped closer, its massive head lowering, those amber eyes burning brighter. Then, without warning, it spoke, not with words, but with his own voice. "Why do you run from yourself, John?" He screamed, scrambling to his feet and bolting into the forest. Branches tore at his clothes, the snow blinding him, but behind him, the sound of paws thundered like drums. It was chasing him, always close, always silent until it wanted him to hear. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He collapsed beside a fallen tree, pressing himself against the frozen bark, gasping. He listened. Nothing. The forest was still again. No footsteps. No breath. Just silence. Slowly, he looked up. The wolf stood above him, its head tilted slightly, one paw pressing gently into the snow beside his shoulder. It leaned close enough for him to feel the heat of its breath. Then, in a low rumble that wasn't quite a growl, it whispered, "Do you remember the mountain, John?" He froze. That word, mountain, meant nothing to him, and yet it sparked something, a flash of memory. Snow. An avalanche, the cockpit shaking, voices screaming. He saw his hands gripping the controls. He wasn't a passenger. He was the wolf. Lunge. Instinct took over. John rolled aside, grabbing a broken branch. He swung wildly, catching the beast across the snout. It yelped, not in pain, but in rage, and vanished into the trees. John stumbled to his feet, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The forest swallowed the sound of its retreat, leaving him alone again. He stood there, shaking, clutching the broken branch like a lifeline. Then, from somewhere far behind him, came the sound of the silver bell. Once, twice, and then a child's laughter, echoing through the snow. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat with his back to a tree, eyes wide open, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. But deep in the dark, he could still feel those amber eyes watching. Always watching. And as the cold crept in again, one thought began to crawl through his mind. Maybe the forest wasn't alive. Maybe he was the one who had died. The coordinates had led him to a clearing that opened onto a frozen lake, its surface like a mirror polished by the hand of winter itself. The ice stretched wide, unbroken, reflecting the gray sky and the skeletal trees at its edges. John's boots crunched against the snow as he approached, every step sending a ripple of dread through his chest. He knelt at the edge and peered into the ice. At first, it seemed ordinary, just layers of frost and bubbles trapped beneath, but then he noticed something odd. Shadows moved beneath the surface, slow, deliberate, as if the lake remembered more than it should. He tapped the ice with his fist. A hollow, echoing sound rang out. Then, in the center of the lake, a glint appeared, metallic, angular. His breath caught. It couldn't be. Another plane, identical to Flight 227, the same shape, the same broken wings, half buried beneath layers of ice, as though the lake had swallowed it whole and preserved it for decades. A chill ran down his spine. How was this possible? He had seen the wreck of his own plane scattered in the forest, and yet, here it lay again, whole. The air seemed to vibrate, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand. John knelt closer, peering through the translucent ice, his fingers brushing the frozen surface. The cold bit at his skin, but he didn't care. He needed answers. Then he noticed something else, figures inside the wreck, not moving, yet somehow alive. Shadows flickered across the windows. He could make out faces, pale and frozen in expressions of terror and surprise. Among them, a familiar one, his own. The man in the cockpit looked exactly like him, right down to the scar above his eyebrow. John stumbled back, heart hammering. "This isn't real," he whispered. The forest behind him groaned as if in agreement, the wind rattling through the branches like teeth gnashing. Suddenly, a sound, faint at first, like whispers, carried through the ice. Then louder, more insistent. Voices, overlapping, speaking in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. "We remember. We wait. We follow." A shiver ran through him. He turned toward the forest, half expecting the shadows to leap from the trees. The snow beneath his boots seemed softer, almost wet. He knelt again at the edge, mesmerized, and saw movement beneath the ice, something alive. Not the plane, something older. The ice cracked faintly. Thin lines spider-webbed outward from the center. A subtle vibration coursed through the lake, resonating in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to run, yet his legs refused. Something was drawing him in, compelling him to see, to touch, to confront. John dropped his hands, pressing his face against the ice. The frozen water was clear now. Beneath the wreck, he could see not just shadows of passengers, but the forest itself. Trees twisted and bent in unnatural angles, roots entwined with the wreckage, as if the plane had crashed into the lake centuries ago. Trapped in a cycle that refused to end, a voice, faint but unmistakable, echoed in his mind. The lake remembers. As do we. He jerked back, gasping. The surface of the ice shimmered and, in a blink, was perfectly still again. No plane, no shadows, no movement, only frozen perfection. He stared, half mad, at the glassy surface. Was it a vision? A hallucination from cold and hunger? Or had the forest, the lake, and the very land conspired to show him something impossible? The wind picked up, carrying a new sound, the faint, rhythmic chime of a bell. It wasn't far, and it wasn't soft. It was insistent, urgent. He glanced toward the tree line. Something was moving there, something tall and silent. John shivered. He knew he couldn't stay. Whatever had created the vision beneath the ice, it was watching, waiting, perhaps guiding him deeper into the wilderness. And now, he realized, the forest game had begun in earnest. He took a deep breath, forcing his fear into a semblance of control, and began walking along the edge of the lake. Every step felt heavier than the last. Somewhere beneath him, beneath the ice, something old and patient pulsed, a heartbeat that wasn't his, and yet matched the rhythm of his own terror. Above, the gray sky stretched endless. The lake reflected it perfectly, and in that reflection, he thought he saw eyes, hundreds of them, staring back from the frozen depths, waiting for him to move forward. The night was a living nightmare. The wind howled through the skeletal forest, scraping against the frozen trees like the whisper of ghosts. Ethan sat by the faint glow of his dying fire, his breath clouding in the frigid air. His body trembled not only from the cold but from the uneasy feeling that something was watching him. It started with a sound low, guttural, almost like the earth itself groaning. Then came the crunch of heavy footsteps over the snow. Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. The fire crackled softly, throwing long, trembling shadows across the trees. A deep growl rumbled from the darkness beyond the firelight. He turned slowly, his eyes widening as a colossal shape moved between the pines. A bear, massive and ancient, its fur matted with frost and dirt. Its eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, not with simple animal hunger, but with something colder, something knowing. Ethan's mind raced. He grabbed the sharpened stick he'd fashioned earlier for spearfishing, pathetic against such a monster, but it was all he had. The bear stepped forward, its breath a plume of white mist, the scent of rot filling the air. "Stay back," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. The bear let out a roar that shook the ground beneath him. He swung the burning branch from the fire, waving it wildly. Sparks flew, the flame dancing against the dark, but the bear didn't retreat, it lunged. Ethan dove aside, feeling the rush of air as claws tore through where he'd been a second before. He rolled in the snow, his ribs aching, the torch flying from his hand and dying in the frost. Darkness swallowed them both. The only sound was heavy breathing, his and the creature's. Ethan crawled toward the remnants of his pack, his fingers numb. Somewhere in the madness, his hand closed around the cold handle of the small hatchet. The bear roared again and charged. Ethan barely had time to react. He swung with everything left in him. The blade bit deep into the creature's shoulder. It bellowed, blood steaming against the snow. Ethan stumbled back, panting, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. The bear struck him with its paw, sending him crashing into a tree. Pain shot through his body. He gasped, blinking through dizziness. The world tilted and spun, but through sheer survival instinct, he lifted the hatchet once more. The bear lunged for his throat. Ethan dropped low and, with a desperate cry, drove the blade upward into its neck. The sound that followed was horrible, a choking roar that faded into a ragged gurgle. The beast staggered, collapsed, and finally went still. For a long time, Ethan didn't move. His hands trembled as he looked at the massive body beside him. The snow beneath him was crimson, steam rising into the cold night like a spirit leaving the world. When he finally stood, every muscle screamed in pain. He stared at the bear's lifeless form, awe and fear mixing in his chest. But there was something else, an eerie shimmer around the body, like faint northern lights pulsing in the darkness. He blinked, but the glow faded. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe madness. Either way, Ethan realized that he had crossed a line that night. He was no longer just surviving nature. He was fighting something much older, something that had been waiting for him deep in these woods. The next morning, he buried what was left of the bear beneath the snow. As he turned away, he swore he could still feel its eyes on him, and somewhere far beyond the tree line, a low growl echoed again, too distant to be real, too close to ignore. Dawn came, but the forest did not brighten. The weak northern sun barely pierced through the gray clouds that hung low over the endless expanse of snow and pines. Ethan sat near what was left of his camp, his clothes stiff with frozen blood. The memory of the bear's roar still echoed in his ears. He stared at the mound of snow where he had buried the creature. The wind brushed across it gently, like invisible fingers. For a brief moment, he thought he saw it move. His heart skipped a beat, but, when he blinked, it was still again. He forced himself to breathe. "You're losing it," he muttered. But deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. He packed what little he had left, a few scraps of dried meat, his hatchet, the broken lighter, and a handful of firewood, and began to walk north. Somewhere, he told himself, there had to be a river or a ranger station, maybe even a small village. Anything human, anything alive, but the forest seemed endless. Every step he took looked like the one before. The trees whispered in the wind, their bare branches creaking as if they were speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps behind him, soft and slow, matching his pace. He turned more than once, but there was never anyone there. Hours passed. The sky darkened again, and snow began to fall in lazy spirals. Exhausted, Ethan found shelter beneath a rocky overhang. He built a small fire, its weak light flickering across the stone. That was when he noticed something strange. The snow near the fire wasn't melting, it was evaporating, vanishing in thin wisps of mist. The smoke rose straight up and didn't drift away with the wind. It just hung there, still and unnatural. And then, a voice, soft, distant, like a whisper carried through miles of forest. "Ethan." He froze. His name. Someone had spoken his name. He looked around wildly. "Who's there?" Only the fire answered him with a faint crackle. But the whisper came again, closer now. "You shouldn't have killed it." His heart pounded. "Who are you?" He shouted into the dark. The trees responded with a low sigh. The shadows deepened around him. He stood, clutching his hatchet, every nerve on fire. And then, from just beyond the firelight, he saw them eyes. Dozens of pale, ghostly eyes, watching from between the trees. He stepped back toward the flames, his breath shallow. The figures didn't move closer, but their presence was unmistakable, tall, thin shapes that flickered in and out of sight like mist. One of them stepped forward. The fire bent toward it as if drawn by a magnetic pull. For a brief moment, Ethan thought he saw the outline of a man dressed in the ragged clothes of an old-time hunter, his face hidden beneath shadow. "You've broken the balance," the voice said again, this time from inside his mind. "The forest remembers." Ethan stumbled back, shaking his head. No, it was self-defense. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a spectral hand and pointed toward the north, the same direction Ethan had been walking. Then, like smoke in a gust of wind, the figure vanished. The eyes faded one by one until only the dark remained. Ethan collapsed by the fire, trembling uncontrollably. His breath came in ragged gasps. For a long time, he couldn't move. The silence was heavy, pressing down on him like snow on a dying tree. When he finally looked toward the bear's burial mound far beyond the trees, he saw something that froze his blood. The snow was disturbed. Tracks massive, deep, unmistakably bear led away into the forest, but they glowed faintly blue in the darkness, and they were heading north. Ethan followed the glowing footprints through the trees, his breath harsh and ragged in the freezing air. Each step cracked the brittle crust of snow beneath him. The forest had grown unnaturally silent. Even the wind had died. Only the faint shimmer of blueprints guided him forward, winding deeper into the heart of the wilderness. He didn't know why he followed them. Every part of him screamed to turn back, to hide, to wait for morning, but something stronger pulled him onward. Maybe it was guilt. maybe madness. Or maybe something ancient had already bound him to this path. The prince led him through a ravine where the moonlight barely touched the ground. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. Every shadow looked alive. The branches overhead formed twisted shapes, like skeletal hands reaching toward him. At one point, he stopped to rest beside a fallen log. His body ached from the fight and the cold. He closed his eyes just for a moment, and when he opened them again, the snow around him had changed. The glowing tracks now circled him, enclosing him like a ritual mark. His pulse spiked. He gripped the hatchet tightly and stood up. "You're not real," he muttered, trying to sound brave. "You're not." Then the sound came. A low rumble from deep within the forest. Not a growl, not thunder, something else. Something alive. He turned toward it. The darkness ahead pulsed like breathing lungs. The snow drifted upward instead of down, and out of that impossible void stepped the bear. But it was no longer the same creature he had killed. Its fur shimmered like smoke. Its eyes glowed with that same unnatural blue light. Where Ethan's hatchet had struck, the wound burned with faint embers, still open, still bleeding light instead of blood. The air around it warped and shimmered, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and rot. Ethan stumbled backward. "No, I buried you." The bear advanced, its heavy steps silent on the snow, its head tilted slightly, almost human-like, as though it remembered him. Then came a deep voice, not spoken aloud, but resonating inside his skull. "You took my life. Now yours belongs to the forest." Ethan fell to his knees, clutching his head, the voice echoing like thunder inside his mind. The world spun. He could feel the ground beneath him shift, as if he were standing on something breathing. "Stop, please," he cried out. "I didn't mean to." The bear lunged forward, but, before it struck, the forest itself intervened. The trees bent inward, their branches slashing down like claws. The bear roared, struck by some invisible force, and the glow around it flared brighter. Ethan, blinded by the light, shielded his eyes. When he looked again, the creature was gone. Only smoke and a few glowing embers remained, floating like dying fireflies. Then he heard the whisper again, different this time, gentler. "Keep walking, Ethan. You must find the heart, the heart," he whispered, trembling. No answer came, but a faint trail of blue light stretched ahead into the dark. It wound between the trees like a path made of stars. Exhausted and terrified, Ethan followed it. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time no longer felt real. He moved through valleys, across frozen rivers, through forests where the trees grew twisted and black. The light never faded. It led him to a clearing surrounded by ancient stone pillars half buried in the snow. In the center was a frozen pond, perfectly circular, its surface glowing faintly from beneath the ice. Something was moving there, something large, slow, and pulsing, like a heartbeat deep under the frost, the heart of the forest. He approached cautiously, breath fogging the air. When he crouched near the edge, he saw his reflection in the ice bale, hollow-eyed, exhausted. But next to his reflection was another face, the bear's, and it was smiling. The frozen pond pulsed like a living thing, the faint blue glow beneath its surface matching the rhythm of Ethan's own heartbeat. He stared into it, mesmerized and horrified at once. The air around him seemed to vibrate with whispers, voices speaking in languages too old to be human. He tried to back away, but his feet wouldn't move. It was as if the ground itself was holding him there. The wind had stopped completely. The silence was suffocating. Only the slow, steady thump from beneath the ice reminded him that time was still passing. Then, without warning, a crack split across the pond. The sound was deafening in the stillness. Ethan staggered back as more fractures snaked outward like lightning bolts. From the largest one, a pale blue light poured out, and a shape began to rise, massive, indistinct, shifting between animal and human. It was the bear. But this time, it wasn't just the creature he had killed. It was many. The spirit towered before him, its form woven from mist, shadow, and bone. Faces flickered within its body, old hunters, travelers, victims of the same wilderness that had almost claimed him. They whispered in unison, their voices echoing through the clearing. "We are the forest. The ones who took. The ones who fell. The ones who remember." Ethan's breath came fast and shallow. What do you want from me? The bear's head lowered until its glowing eyes were level with his. Balance. The chorus answered. You killed what was bound to protect. You carry the burden now. He shook his head violently. No, I didn't choose this. Survival is never a choice, the voices murmured. It is the trade. The spirit extended one massive, spectral paw, touching his chest. Ethan gasped as searing cold spread through him. His vision blurred. The forest spun. He saw flashes memories that weren't his. Hunters lost in the storm, wolves dying in traps, ancient fires devouring the trees, and always, the same figure, the bear, guardian of this frozen realm, slain and reborn through every age. Now, the cycle demanded a replacement. Ethan fell to his knees, screaming as the light engulfed him. His skin turned pale, frost crawling up his arms like veins of ice. His heart pounded faster, matching the rhythm of the glowing pond. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. The forest held its breath. Moments later, the surface of the pond stilled again, the cracks sealing as if they'd never been there. Only the faint shimmer beneath the ice remained pulsing, slow, steady, eternal. Where Ethan had stood, there was nothing but snow. And then, from deep within the forest, a new sound echoed, a distant growl, low and powerful, the kind that makes the trees tremble, the kind that warns the living to turn back. A single pair of glowing blue eyes opened in the darkness. The guardian had returned.